An innumerable number of people have entered retirement with a traditionally perfectly planned out investment portfolio strategy, one that by anyone's math really should have lasted them their entire lifetime, but that because they overlooked just one factor in the retirement equation, they ran out of money. Their life plans ruined. In this video, I'll explain to you exactly what it is and why, and I'll walk you through all the math so that you can be as prepared as possible as you strive to achieve your long-term financial goals. Coming up. Welcome back, everybody. If this is your first time here, my name is Steven Spicer, and it's my goal to help you invest smarter. If you're serious about finding the best solutions to provide you with the most stress-free financial future possible, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. The factor I'm talking about is the one we discussed last week, the sequence of returns risk. But last week we only looked at returns during periods of contributions. Now, there's one final consideration we need to explore in this same vein. What about periods of withdrawals? As the intro to this video alluded, this reality is even grimmer, if only for the fact that it represents a period where you're counting on this money to support your lifestyle, when you can't afford for the numbers to be too far off. Let's briefly explore. Once again, the biggest concern here should be honestly factoring for one of those worst case scenarios that your advisor is warning about, or worse. More on that possibility in a later series. If the better than average or even best historical scenarios play out, great. Congratulations, the spin of the roulette wheel was in your favor this time. But some people, real people, tens of millions of them in fact, get stuck with these historically based worst case scenarios during their retirement years. Consider all those clients I told you about in this video from earlier in my career, the ones whose retirement was impacted by the Great Recession. They had some tough choices to make. Postpone retirement, live on less, go back to work. All these were decisions they didn't want to have to be making. They weren't part of the plan. And they were in this position because their advisors and the mainstream pundits didn't help them plan for or even consider this all too real for them worst case scenario. During periods when you're withdrawing money, it's better to have those good returns early on, the opposite of those contribution periods. Let's use those same historical returns from 1974 through 1983 that we considered during our last video. We'll assume an account with $1 million and a $90,000 per year withdrawal. With the best return years first, your $1 million account grows to $1.66 million by the end of that decade, even with your annual spending. This results in an effective annualized return of 12.7% instead of the 12.4% simple average. With those worst years first, however, you would have realized an effective loss of 1.4% per year, leaving you with just $22,000 at the end of that 10th year. That means with these assumptions, your real average return could be anywhere between 12.7% and negative 1.4%. But during withdrawal periods, it's the impact this sequence of returns has on your remaining nest egg that should concern you the most, not the percentage. Here, it would mean you could end up with anywhere between a healthy $1.66 million or a meager $22,000 at the end of a single decade. And by the way, that's all without accounting for any fees, advisory, or on the fund level. This is the difference between the ecstatic, let's go on a few more trips and upgrade our cars next year, and the depressed, looks like we have to downsize and go back to work in order to survive. You get a taste of those two extremes when we consider the curious case of Michael and Michelle. These are two different people with identical lives. They retire at the exact same time, at age 60, with the exact same amount of money. They take the exact same annual income distributions from their market-based retirement accounts each and every year. Their financial advisors told them that based on conservative estimates derived from the market's average historical returns, they should be fine. And they should be, based on the market's average historical return. Let's start with Michael. He retires January 1st, 2000 with $2 million and takes $120,000 annual income distributions. His average annual return from 2000 through 2018 is 8.1%. The far right column reflects Michael's new account balance at the end of each year, after accounting for his withdrawal and the year's returns. As you can see, in his 16th year of retirement, Michael is officially broke at age 76. Now let's look at Michelle. Like Michael, she retires on January 1st, 2000 with $2 million and takes $120,000 out of her accounts each year. Note that Michelle averages that exact same 8.1% per year return. Yet when you look at her end-of-year account values, you noticed a stark contrast to Michael's. What gives? They both had the same amount of money to start with. They both withdrew the same amounts every year. And they both realized the exact same average annual return of more than 8%. The only difference here is the sequence of returns. Look closely. They're the exact same, just in the opposite order. Michael realized negative 9.1% during his first year in retirement, while that's what Michelle realized in her last year. Michael's last year on this chart was negative 10.2% return, whereas that was Michelle's first year return. You'll find this is the case all the way throughout these sequences. They're the exact same returns, just in the exact opposite order. So who would you rather be? Obviously, we all want to be in Michelle's position here. 16 years in, at age 76, Michael's broke, and Michelle's swimming in more than $5 million. So, what then did Michelle do differently? How could we emulate her success in our financial planning? We can't. The truth is, Michelle just got lucky here. She didn't outperform due to a superior strategy. They were both invested according to mainstream investment advice, that modern portfolio theory, the stock and bond only buy and hold approach. Neither one of them had more control over their outcome than the other, despite the massive disparity between their final results. The timing and sequence of Michelle's returns just happened to work out in her favor. And that's how millions of people go into retirement, just hoping, even if they don't realize that that's what they're doing, that the timing and sequence of their returns work out in their favor. And it's not their fault. It's not your fault. It's the advisor's fault. It's the fault of that mainstream investment paradigm. You're taught to expect. You're told you conservatively should expect an 8% average rate of return in retirement, or 6%, or 10%, or 7%. It doesn't matter. There's some fixed level of return. Well, that's what Michael got. Didn't work out so well for him, did it? That average annual return figure becomes meaningless if you're really serious about creating a comprehensive financial plan, one that will get you through retirement, no matter what. I can't speak for you, but I personally don't want to have to depend on luck to get me through retirement. I don't accept that for my clients, and I don't think you should either. I hope you'll allow me one final example before we wrap this up. The magic number for a lot of people when planning for retirement is $1 million. That's what they're working for their entire lives. That's what they think they need in order to comfortably retire. Maybe that's because they've heard about the so-called safe withdrawal rate of 4%, and they think, worst case scenario, I can pull out $40,000 per year, adjusting for inflation, and get by. That's what the popular safe withdrawal rate would suggest. That whatever your starting sum may be, as long as your initial withdrawal is 4.1% or less, you could then increase that withdrawal amount each year to account for inflation and still be okay. In other words, following these guidelines, you should be able to live without fear of outliving your money. Let's test this with a historical worst case. The worst 15-year period for the S&P 500 produced a simple average return of 4.7%. This period included some massive up years, by the way. Years anyone would be ecstatic about realizing during retirement, including a 34% gain, a 48% gain, and even the market's best year ever, a 54% gain. Performing a quick calculation, not yet accounting for withdrawals, and naively not adjusting for any of the factors we've covered thus far, would generate an expectation of $1.58 million at the end of this worst 15-year period ever. If, however, you're not even considering any sort of worst case scenario, and you're just running with that cliched 8%, as most advisors do, then you'd be expecting 3.2 million. At 10%, it'd be 4.2 million. At 12%, 5.5 million at the end of that same period. Now, after taking that 8% figure and accounting for those safe withdrawals, starting at 40,000 and increasing by just 2.5% per year to conservatively account for inflation, you'd be left with $1.9 million at the end of 15 years. Not bad. You'd probably feel okay as you entered retirement with those expectations. Now, let's jump back to that historically worst 15-year period, where the simple average was 4.7%. The actual return during that time period was 0.6%. So that would have left you with $1.1 million instead. That's $475,000 or 30% less than your previous worst case projections. After accounting for a modest 1% advisory fee and 0.4% fund fee, the effective return would have been negative 0.8%. With this, you would find yourself at the end of those 15 years with less than $900,000, or in other words, $685,000, 44% less than you expected with your worst case scenario. Now, when we also incorporate this safe 4% withdrawal, you should be okay, right? Your funds should still last. After all, this is supposed to be the worst case historically based bare minimum figure, right? There is absolutely data to support as much. But here's the reality of how those numbers would play out for you. By year 13, you're out of money. Pretty depressing if in year 15 you were expecting $1.9 million with your advisor's simple rule of thumb calculations for your uber conservative withdrawal projections. So what'll it be? Go back to work? Or severely cut back your bare minimum standard of living when you see things going south just a few years into your retirement? Are you really willing to take that risk? Especially when you don't have to, when there's a better way? Foreshadowing. Stay tuned. Sadly, although you may not be comfortable with it, as you shouldn't be, it would seem most advisors and pundits are comfortable with you taking that risk, that is. Because even though it's not openly discussed in the mainstream narrative, this is clearly a risk you are taking when you follow their traditional advice. Now, the industry's answer, especially for this last concern, is an ivory tower philosophy known as modern portfolio theory, MPT for short. It's where the buy and hold stock and bond only investment strategy for the average investor stems from. We'll dedicate more than one series in the future to uncovering and exploring the logical fallacies and historical failings of this foundational myth. So I'll save an even more detailed explanation of how it works and where it comes from for then. At its very basic level, however, the recommendation would be to throw some bonds in the mix. A big part of the idea behind this is that bonds are considered to be less risky. At some point or another during this video, I'm sure more than one viewer angrily posted in the comments that
this is why you need to add bonds. Dislike, unsub, and promptly left without finishing.
Sure, historically speaking, there it is again, this should reduce those downward and upward surprises. Again, we'll dive into the validity of all of this, MPT in general, very soon. But as for getting you closer to that expected 8%, 10%, or 12% return, even 6%, it won't. Depending on the types of bonds we're talking about here, the historical average return, geometric, would put your expectations somewhere between 3 and 7% compared to the stock market's 10.2%. And of course, that's not even factoring in fees yet. So for now, suffice it to say that on the whole, this addition should reduce your performance expectations by even more. All things considered, that conservative 8% or higher that you'll hear from most advisors out there at best would be irresponsible to count on. At worst, it seems like something out of a fairy tale. For anyone who's serious about securing your financial future, it's effectively useless. In our next video, I'll provide you with some figures that will prove more practically useful when planning for your market accounts in retirement. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification bell so that you don't miss it. And if you'd like a little more direct access to me and my team, come hang out with us in our private community at community.spicercapital.com. I can't wait to see you there. Regardless, I wish you all the best.